I don't know if you'll still be able to be recording if you hand over. If you make me a co-host, it should still be able to continue recording.
Well,
Yes, she'll be able to record. So
yeah, I should still be able to record.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're the host now, and I'm still recording. So
Excellent.
Yes.
well, thank you for this session, Dr. Blackwood, and then we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.
Hello,
You're so
Ade.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Okay, do you want to start now, or you would want us to still give them the chance?
Whenever you're ready.
join?
Whenever you're ready, I'm good to go.
Okay, I think we can still give them more time to join. Good evening, CK.
I have a question though. Does giving more time to start mean the workshop will last longer than intended, than 7 o'clock?
No, I will need to go right at 7. So
Okay, because I would need to go at 7 too.
okay.
Okay, it's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank
Good
you.
question. We will start shortly, and then anyone who is late, they can always watch the recording. So
Okay, I welcome everybody. This is Youth Now on Track Services. I'm sure by joining, you already know you're joining through Youth Now on Track Services. And we have Dr. Blackwood right here, who is going to enlighten us and take us through the workshop. So I'm handing over to Dr. Blackwood. Thank you for being here, and thank you.
my pleasure. Thank you all. It's good to see everybody. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And hopefully, oh, don't want to do that. Hopefully everybody can see. Can everybody see? Should be able to use the chat. Excellent. And everybody can hear me. Good. We're off to a good start. Well, this is the perfect topic to be looking at the start of the year. Goals, 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 goals. Now, goals are sometimes like a bad word to some people because, you know, it brings up some pain. For youth, it brings up frustration, you know, because they, you know, sometimes don't like to be told what to do, right? So, and goals make us think about, you know, things that we have to do. Well, we're going to talk about some secrets, 6 juicy secrets. I should add juicy to this title. 6, well, it doesn't start with an S. An S would be better. 6, I don't know, savory secrets to successful goal setting. That's what we're going to talk about today. So for those of you who are new to me, I am Dr. Andrew Blackwood, also known as Coach Drew, your healing communication coach. And by the end of our time today, you will have a sense of who I am and how I work. But ultimately, I'm an integrationist. I like to integrate everything that I've learned. And, you know, from a spiritual, clinical, practical lens, they all come into one. So we're going to get into some good stuff today. And for those of you who don't know this about me, my favorite part of every presentation is the question and answer period. So I look forward to your questions, whether that means you are wanting clarity about something that I've said, or you have a scenario that you want to get a different perspective on. By all means, hold on to those questions. And if you happen to be unmuted at some point during the presentation, by all means, feel free to mute yourself so that I can stay focused. So let's dive into this, because there's a lot of information here. I'm going to go over some things pretty generally, because there will be some things that you all are probably familiar with, but I want to dig into what I have been learning about myself and about how I achieve goals or don't achieve goals. So there are some myths that I held about successful people. People like Oprah, or people like, you know, I don't know, Martin Luther King, anybody who you might aspire to, you know, that you see in the public eye, who've achieved great things. I think of those people as successful people. And growing up, there are some myths that I had about them. So you can let me know if you can relate to them. But one of those myths is that success happens overnight. We look at people and we see them doing amazing things and expressing themselves so eloquently, and you know, even Olympic athletes, you know, they seem to do things so effortlessly. And what we don't know is that their stories have taken years, decades upon decades to be told, right? They didn't end up where they were overnight. I heard this saying a long time ago, and I love it. You know, success is when opportunities align with preparation. When opportunities meet preparation, you will experience success, or you will witness success. So people don't become successful overnight. I think about Dr. Martin Luther King, one of my most favorite world influencers, and I read his biography many years ago. And you'd be surprised to think that, you know, I have a dream. His iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, that wasn't something that he just wrote on the spot. That was something that was building for years. He wasn't this successful leader. There were times when he had no idea where he was going, what he was doing, and if he really fit in the legacy of his fathers and forefathers who were also ministers. So there is quite often a long journey for people. So you might be at the beginning of your journey or at the middle of your journey. You might be at decade 10 or 20 or 30 when it comes to a particular goal. But keep preparing. Okay, success doesn't happen overnight. Here's another myth that I thought was actually really true. I just assumed that successful people don't fail. I assume that they never fail, that anything they do is done well, it's done perfectly, and you know, they don't fall on their face and they don't embarrass themselves, and you know, because those are my greatest fears, and that they wouldn't happen to other people. That's my assumption. When the exact opposite is true. Every successful person that I've spoken to or that I've heard talk about their journey, they have this in common. They have several things in common, but this is one of them: their relationship to failure. And it's not what most people think. Failure, and I came up with this acronym one day, failure is actually something that's really closely aligned with the journey of successful people. I consider now failure to be our friend, right? When you break it down and you see failure as something that is not against you, but it's actually helping you, you can actually be friends with failure. Friend, analyze. Let's think about this. Let's really think about this. We want to investigate what contributed to things going poorly. Why didn't this work? Right? Why didn't things turn out the way that I want to? It's a good thing to look at the information. You want to analyze the details. You want to ask some really good questions. You want to investigate so you can actually learn. Learn about the situation, learn about other people. Most importantly, you want to learn about yourself. Learn about yourself, because we think and we live as creatures of habit in patterns, right? If you failed in one area, chances are you failed in another area, whether it's similar to it, but maybe the reasons for the failure, the lack of success are the same. So it's good to learn from it so that you can understand, but not just understand, but that you can actually be understanding, right? When our failures make sense, we can not only understand from a cognitive, like comprehension standpoint, but we can actually be understanding, right? We can actually show ourselves empathy. And I remember when I was in high school, I wanted to be a doctor. So those of you, many of you have probably heard this before. I wanted to be a pediatrician ever since I was a little boy. But when I was in high school, I failed chemistry. And let me tell you, I didn't know I was depressed at the time, but I was depressed and I almost lost my mind because from my perspective, my whole life was over. And I didn't really think about what contributed to me failing chemistry. I assumed that I just wasn't smart enough. I assumed if I was intelligent enough to pass chemistry, which you needed to have in order to become a medical doctor, to go to university, if I was intelligent enough, I would have passed it the first time. I didn't understand that the degree of stress that I was under in that period of my life, because of all the other factors and the context of my life, I didn't process the information well. I didn't have a good chance to learn. And people are different. So when I'm under stress, I don't process things well. My processing doesn't work as naturally, right? So had I known that, I would have been more understanding towards myself. And then I would have done what R invites us to do, which is regroup, right? You regroup, you put a better plan together based on what you now know, and then you execute and you try again, right? Some goals, we probably, if they're unsafe and unhealthy, we probably shouldn't have tried them in the first place. But I'm talking about goals that come from a good place, that are in alignment with our values, and that are helpful to others as well. So we'll come to a bit of that a little bit later. But the point here is failure is not bad. Failure is our friend. Successful people know this. The most successful people, whether you're talking about financially or otherwise, they have failed, but they didn't stop. They learned from it. Okay. So that's myth number one, myth number two. Let's go to myth number three. Success comes easily to them. A lot of times we look at people, again, beyond thinking that it just came quickly to them, we also think success comes easily to other people, right? Successful people. We think that it's easy. Take an Olympic athlete or runner, for example. We think that because running comes naturally to them, that winning at the level that they do is easy for them. I don't think that's the case, right? Just because something comes naturally doesn't mean that it's easy to develop it into a skill. And successful people are not just talented and gifted people. They are skillful people, okay? Talents and gifts, they come to us naturally. They're given to us. But skill is what we give to those talents. It's what we give to God. It's what we give to others by investing, right? It takes energy, it takes time, it takes sacrifice, it takes focus, it takes determination and discipline. And that never stops, right? You can be talented and successful, but when you stop becoming disciplined, or you stop being disciplined, you stop investing, you snooze, you lose, right? You sleep on it, you might wake up and not have it anymore. So not only does it not come easy for people to hone skills and be the best and top of their game, it takes energy and effort to maintain that, right? So I walk away with a different respect for people who are excellent and that are successful in their own right, because I no longer assume that what they do comes easily to them, right? With practice, things become natural, right? They become automatic, but then there's still the maintenance that needs to happen. The fourth myth about successful people is having goals is only easy for certain people. Okay, sometimes we think that it's easy for people to have goals and goals come naturally to them. Well, I think there's some truth to that. Excuse me, there's some truth to it. However, some people do things naturally, right? And they obtain and they achieve. But then there are other kinds of goals which actually require a lot of thinking and intentionality, and that's what we're going to get into. But before I do, I think there's something really important to talk about goals, or for us to understand about goals. I like to eat food, okay? I love to eat. It's one of my most favorite things to do. And if you're anything like me, standing in front of the fridge, try to figure out what to eat. I tell my kids, okay, close the fridge. Think about what you want before you go to the fridge. But sometimes I find myself standing in front of the fridge. And my goal is to satisfy my hunger, right? At least that's one goal. Another goal is to find something that I'm actually in the mood to eat, something that might not take a lot of time to prepare, right? So I can have multiple goals in the moment, but those goals, they're actually inspired by something that's happening on the inside of me. A lot of the times we think goals come from the outside, but the best goals are the ones that are actually coming from within. So by the end of our time today, we're going to not only talk about what makes a good goal, what kinds of goals there are, what's required, but we're also going to talk about some barriers to being successful at defining our goals and then maintaining or achieving them, right? So we're going to get into all of that right now. Number one, the first thing to consider is the element of time, and time is going to come in and out of our goals because we live in a world where there is time, right? But what we want to do is consider the time frame. Okay, time frame for goals. There are all different kinds of goals. And like I said, me standing in the front of the fridge, we have multiple goals at the same time. So one of the things that's important is to think about, is this goal a short-term goal, which is 1 day or to 1 year? Is this a midterm goal, 1 year to 5 years, or is this a long-term goal, 5 years and more? Because one of the things that I struggled with when I was, pursuing different things, and one thing in particular was the book that I wrote, The Art of a Genuine Apology. I didn't stop to think about, is this a short-term goal? Is this a midterm goal? Or is this a long-term goal? And it actually took 18 months to write it, to finish from start to finish, from cover to cover, editing and all those things. I learned so much. Looking back, I mean, I could have saved a lot of time, but one of the things that I didn't really consider was, how long do I think this is going to take me? Is this a short-term goal? Is this a midterm goal? Is this a long-term goal? So I hope as you're listening and as we're working through this, that you are actually thinking about your goals and literally integrating these concepts as we move through our time today. So a short-term goal, a midterm goal, a long-term goal. It's important to consider the time frame. Successful people consider the time frame. Even before launching into a goal, they'll consider, okay, where is this on my kind of life map, right? Because it really does impact our expectations of ourselves, of other people, and helps us to plan accordingly. Okay, so that's number one. Let's go to number two. Again, related to time, it's important to consider the duration of the kind of goal or project that we're working on. It's another thing that I didn't know and I didn't really do a lot of. I would just jump into a task like writing a book, and I wouldn't consider, is this a single execution type process or project, or is this one that's going to require ongoing investment? Okay, so when something like a book, for example, is a single execution kind of deal. Like it's a single project. What's often helpful is to block off a period of time, a big chunk of time, right? Whether it's a day or a week, right? A few days to really dig into this particular project. And this happens usually outside of your regular routine. Okay, because it's going to be like a one and done kind of project, you want to devote concentrated time to finishing it. This is not going to be necessarily woven into your everyday life. Now, this book, for example, because it is a midterm kind of goal, it could be woven into your everyday life. So it can kind of bridge the two. But now that I have experience of writing this book, I will do my next book very differently, right? So another aspect about single execution kind of projects is they can cost you a lot of time or money over a concentrated period of time. So if I were going to do, like, I'm going to do the audiobook, right? Instead of trying to do that over a period of months, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 or 3 days, and whether that means going away, and finding a quiet place, concentrated place, or renting a space, or whatever it is that I need to do, that would benefit that for a limited amount of time. So that's a different kind of project than something that's an ongoing investment, where this is not going to end, probably for the rest of your life. There are some goals that are ongoing investment goals, like fitness. Okay. As long as we're alive, we will be in these bodies. So it makes sense to maintain them and have that be a part of our lifestyle. That's very different. It's still a goal, but it's very different than a project that will be done in a couple days, right? I used to entertain my physical fitness like it was a single education kind of goal, because I wanted to build mass or I wanted to look a certain way. So I only had a certain time frame in mind for my goals, as opposed to blocking off periods of time and making it a regular part of my routine for the rest of my life, right? So to do things like that, because you're integrating it into your life, it might cost you less time and less money initially, or in those, concentrated moments, but it's spread out over time, right? So what I'm doing now, I'd like to use myself as an example. I have a regular routine for my fitness, and I like to change. I know myself, I like changes, and, I like to change my routine. However, it's important for me to have some sort of structure that I'm maintaining. And so my goal is going to be there every single day. It's not just, it's a lifestyle change. Okay. So that's going to be really important to consider. So projects are very different than lifestyle goals. They can merge, okay, depending on some of those other factors that we've already talked about. But more often than not, it's good to put your goals and your projects into different categories. Another thing that's time related is your energy. Okay. Knowing yourself well helps you to be successful at achieving and your goals and maintaining a lifestyle, right? Are you a morning or afternoon or night person? I am a morning person, 100%. I love morning times. Even if I go to bed late, my body naturally wakes up in the morning. I love the quiet. I feel energized. I feel alert most often. So morning time is a good time for me to work on certain goals, right? Whereas my wife or one of my daughters, they're more like afternoon, night people. So when I'm shutting down, they're kind of ramping up. So it's important to think about how you manage your time in light of who you are and what your energy is like. Sure, you can exercise discipline and make changes, but quite often it's best to pair what you're doing with who you actually are, right? Most naturally. Another thing to think about is your season of life. Are you a student? Are you a parent? Are you an employee, or do you own your own business? And what stage of parenthood are you in, right? Parenting a newborn is very different than parenting, an 11-year-old or a 17-year-old. I know every change will come with its own challenges and opportunity, but the demands of your energy, your focus, and your time are going to be different depending on the season of your life, right? So it's important to be aware of that. What do you actually have to give, and how do you integrate your goals and your plans and your projects with the season of life that you're in? I wish somebody had told me that. I started writing this book, The Art of a Genuine Apology, around the time of our first daughter's conception and birth. And sure enough, I learned a lot that I integrated into the book. So I grew, so it wasn't a total loss. But a lot of the content that I wanted to put in the book, I already knew, I already had, based on all these years of experience of working with people. So I anticipated that it would take a lot less time to write the book, but trips to the hospital, helping my wife whenever I could. And, it made the process take a lot longer. So as you are thinking about your goals, it's important to integrate, the awareness of the season of life and other costs to your time and your energy, which will help you to be more realistic with the timelines that you create, right? So that's something that I learned. And that ties into, what does the task or project require of you in terms of focus, physical or emotional energy? So as much as, fitness is important to me, important to my well-being and my mental health, my emotional, my spiritual health, it really doesn't require a lot of focus for me. It requires physical energy, but it doesn't require emotional energy beyond just kind of getting into it and choosing to do it. But having a routine actually helps me to do that. So it's very different for me to exercise versus for me to write something, right? I enjoy both of them, but one requires more emotional energy and a different kind of focus than the other. So I can get on the exercise machine and row or run or whatever and watch TV, right? or just put on music and dance and whatever. That requires a different degree of focus for me, right? So it's important to think about that. And then also with time and your energy, when are you most available? Morning times, as much as I love them, there's a high competition for my time and energy in the mornings because my children are still young. I like to have my devotional time in the morning. I like to exercise in the morning, but I'm also committed to making breakfast and lunch and dropping off the girls, right? So it's challenging for me to navigate all those things. Whereas it might be, if I'm adding a new goal, it probably would not be wise for me to consider doing that in the morning, right? It might be figuring out, okay, when do I have time later in the day or in the evening, and aligning that with what kind of energy I typically have and what can boost my energy at those times for those projects. So think about when you're most available. That is important. So again, these are things that in retrospect, I wish I knew. Okay. All right, let's talk about number 4. Barriers. This is really rich learning for me. Okay. So I touched on this a little bit earlier. When it comes to goals, it's important to recognize that we will have multiple goals in our lives and multiple goals at the same time in the same moment. So one of the best ways to do this, as you're reflecting, as you take time, like, list your goals. What are all the goals that you have going on in your life? And not just the projects. It's because the other ongoing investment goals, those take time, those require energy, and they're worthy of them. They're not going to stop. So given the season of your life, it's important to list what all those goals are. Okay, so that's my encouragement to you. So as we consider these barriers, you'll see the barrier at the point, and then there will be a suggestion that you can take action on to consider the barriers for yourself. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the quality of thoughts. This is really, really significant. I know for myself and for many of the people that I coach, similar to being hungry physically for food, we are hungry to achieve certain goals and to have certain experiences in our lives. They come from within us, and that's natural. But then sometimes we have thoughts that get in the way of us making progress and being successful with attaining our goals, maintaining our goals, and even defining what those goals are. So I talked a little bit about myself in high school when I was feeling depressed. And for a lot of people, depression happens as a result of being anxious for a long time. Okay, so while depression, can create, can really embody a lot of sadness, it involves sadness and frustration and anger. People don't usually get depressed overnight, right? They're reflecting on experiences of the past and are disappointed, and they feel discouraged, and we get locked into these ideas, these limiting beliefs like, I can't, this won't work, and it's all or nothing kind of thinking. But interestingly enough, they've most likely been thinking with those same kind of thought patterns that made them anxious, right? So what if I don't pass this test? What's going to happen? I know I was worried about passing chemistry. I was worried about math. What if I, what if I fail this test? What if this doesn't work? So even before I failed chemistry overall, I was really worried. I had this all or nothing way of thinking. I had what if negative thoughts? What if this happens? What if that happens? So it wasn't just about school. I had these thoughts about friendships. I had these thoughts about relationships. I had these thoughts about God. Like, these were thought patterns in other areas of my life that I wasn't aware of. And the reason why I encourage people to journal, if you haven't taken my free online advantage of my free online journaling resource, please, by all means, learn how to journal effectively. Because when you start to realize there are patterns in your life, patterned ways of thinking, patterned ways of reacting and responding to things, our responses and our reactions, they also flow out of patterned ways of thinking. Okay. I have a number of different courses that I support people to walk through. One of them is Conquering the Big Five. There are 5 significant ways, most common patterns that produce anxiety and that roll over into depression. So I talked about all or nothing thinking. That's one of them. The negative what ifs, right? That's another one. Sometimes we worry so much about what other people think, and we're so afraid to hurt their feelings, that people don't realize that's a way of thinking, right? People call it people pleasing, but it comes from a particular way of thinking. So it's important to realize what these are and journal so we can learn how to think differently. Our thoughts influence our emotions, and our emotions, they inform our actions, right? Goals are not just about what we do. They start long before we take action or before we refuse to take action, which is an action in and of itself, right? Strange. Inaction is actually action. You're choosing not to do something, which means you're making a choice, but we don't always understand why we make the choices that we make. Thus, this is part of the process that we're going through together. Now, old patterns, okay? Old patterns of behavior. Yes, thoughts are important, but I like to brainstorm because I'm a very much in the moment kind of person. I'm in my head a lot of the times, but when I brainstorm and I put things on paper and I start to think about, okay, what prevented me from accomplishing this goal? Why did I abandon this goal? I put like a circle on the page and I put the project or goal in the middle and say, didn't complete. And then I make all these lines and I just open my mind to consider what was going on that stopped me from completing this task. I had too many goals. I was helping another friend. It might be a good thing, right? I was helping my wife, right? I didn't think that it was actually possible. I didn't actually really want to do this goal, right? There are a number of factors. It's important for us to learn from the past, okay? So if you have, and I know everybody does, if you have a goal that you wanted to achieve, even if it's a lifestyle goal that you haven't been successful at maintaining, it's important to think about what's caused you to fall off and fall away, right? This is something that everyone can do. If you want support to help to do this, by all means, let me know, okay? All right. Did I just jump from number 4 to 6? That's not good. Okay, so let's call this number 5. Let's talk a little bit about motivation. I've done a lot of thinking and work around motivation. Now, there's healthy motivation and then there's unhealthy motivation. Okay. This is really, really critical because sometimes we can have these goals that seem good, even goals that are good, but the motivation behind the goal, not so healthy, right? When we live and pursue goals from a place of desperation, okay, desperation is very different than inspiration. There's this intensity about us, right? There are these unmet needs that move us to be driven, okay? When I talk to parents about their children and understanding their behavior, I talk a lot about um, really what's motivating this behavior. And there are core needs that we have as human beings that really kind of inform and maybe even sometimes predict, but ultimately they explain why people do what they do, right? We want to feel safe, we want to feel strong, and we want to feel significant. And when these needs, right, are not met, and then we try to achieve goals to meet these needs, we run into problems, right? We can be intense and we can be driven, right? Which is very different than being inspired, right? You can be passion filled, right? But not have this driven nature. You can be committed and, passion can be intense, but this kind of passion doesn't overlook the needs of others, right? When we're driven, we will drive over people. Like, it really doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how it impacts you. I'm going to do it. That's not inspiration. That's desperation. Okay. When we're desperate, our goals can be exciting, right? But they're short-lived, right? Even though, let's say, for example, like myself, there have been seasons in my life where I just wanted to, add a couple inches to my biceps or whatever. It was exciting, but it didn't go the distance. It really didn't, because I didn't like lifting weights. It's not fun for me. So the kind of motivation that it's required to be committed, it doesn't come from desperation. It doesn't last very long. You might have short spurts of it, but eventually it dies out. Whereas true inspiration is exciting and it's enduring. You know how many people have these goals that they haven't achieved, but they still want to? It's still a part of their heart. That's inspiration, right? Sure, our inspiration can be it can be colored, it can be dampened because of some of those things that we talked about earlier, anxiety, depression, limiting beliefs. But that internal passion doesn't go away, right? So if you find yourself, running out of steam, it's important to look at what's the motivation. So when I speak with people and I listen to people, I can tell what kind of motivation they are using or really that's filling them up based on how they speak. I have this chart called motivational language, and there's a list of phrases and terms that we use when we are wanting to motivate ourselves in the short term. It adds emphasis, it adds stress. I should, I need to, I have to, right? When we use this language, it stresses us to emphasize things and to take action, but it doesn't last long. And what it does is it actually stresses us out. Whereas if we use positive motivation language, I want to, I get to, I can, this is important for me, I choose to, this kind of language, when we integrate this into our lives, it actually changes our mood, right? And it helps us find the sweet spot, right? Where we can actually transition out of using old ways of thinking and old ways of feeling to things that are more enduring, right? Now, sometimes when we are desperate and we have these unmet needs, right? Like the need for, I don't know, significance, or I will use one of my children, for example. It's a God-given need, I believe, for us to have a sense of control and autonomy in our lives, right? We don't want people to tell us what to do. For some people, like myself and one of my daughters in particular, that's the worst thing. If you want me to do something, don't tell me that I have to do it. Invite me to see how it's important and relevant and beneficial for me. And I'm more likely to own that. So when I forget who I am and what works for me, and I tell her what to do, she will do whatever she can to prove me wrong. And she's brilliant. So she will find reasons why my idea or my way just doesn't make sense, because she wants her way. And she will admit it. We will talk about that. But that kind of motivation doesn't last for very long, right? She will do something to prove a point, but she's not really invested in it. Where she really wants something else, there is no turning her off of it. She will pursue it till the end, because it's something that she actually really wants. It's not done to prove a point. It's done because this is who she is, and she wants to be the best version of herself. Again, these are healthy things, and these are things that are enduring. So it's less about the goal sometimes, and it's more about understanding and maybe even shifting the motivation. So many people, they say, I want to finish college, or I want to go back to school. That's a wonderful goal. But what's the motivation, right? Sometimes we don't follow through because our motivation isn't coming from a healthy place. So it's important to think about that. Now, desperation leads to discouragement. When we are desperate and we fail, we feel discouraged. Okay. That's just what I've found. That's been my experience. And hopefully I'll hear from you all about what your experiences are. But when we are actually inspired, we will remember the importance about this thing, right? And that will yield encouragement for us. We will feel encouraged to go on and to continue, right? How is this beneficial for me? Whether you're talking about what I've learned in my pursuit of this thing, or what will be the benefit of me actually achieving this thing. So again, I'll come back to my whole fitness goals. Sure, it's great to look better in my clothes, but really, is that going to change the world? No, it's really not. Do I need to be on the cover of, I wouldn't even want to be on the cover of Fitness magazine. That's not that important, right? For some people it is, but for me, it's really not. Sure, it's a thing, but again, what is that really about? What is it that I actually really want? What holds value for me? Well, what holds value for me is discipline, is being able to move, right? Mobility is important. It's my mental health. When I go for walks and I think better, I feel better, right? So it's important for me to understand the true value. A lot of people talk about it as knowing your why. What's the benefit? Well, now my girls can run at me and they can jump and I can hold them. I can brace myself and I don't have to worry about my knees buckling, right? Or me throwing out my back, because I've been consistent and I'm strengthening those those fine muscles, right? The small ones that, you know, you overlook when you lift heavy, right? So I'm prioritizing mobility and strength over, you know, mass and lifting heavy. So that's just an example. And the more I do it, it's the more encouraged I feel. So again, the difference between desperation and inspiration is really significant. All right. Now we're at number 6. Consider clarity, and then we'll wrap up, and then we'll go into a time of questions. Clarity, clarity, clarity. There's this overlap here between practical goals and our intangible goals, okay? They start on either end and they meet in the middle. And I think this is important, that our goals are meaningful and spiritual, like I described earlier. Because we can do the practical things and then they just become tasks that we get bored with and they drain us. And then before long, we find ourselves, well, I don't really want to do this. I have to do this again, right? So it's important that we understand the meaning behind them. But on the other end, sometimes we have these very big, beautiful goals that are they're so general. We haven't really, you know, figured out what they actually could possibly be in the real world, right? So as much as I wanted to be a doctor per se, it was so distant, right? It was so far off that I didn't really consider what I could do now to take me in that direction, right? Or when I experienced a challenge, it didn't cross my mind that I could break down this particular goal into really small steps, right? So we bridge the intangible things that we feel in our heart that we want to do. I know I'm called to help people. I'm created to help people, but we don't know exactly how, right? We want to really get a clear vision of what we want to do, what we've been created to do. And then we want to break that vision down into smaller steps, right? Maybe into seasons of our life. In this season of my life, how can I be helping, right? How can I move towards this goal? And then we want to put it into words and we want to write it down. And we want to work these things into our daily life, especially if they're long-term goals. We want to find ways to integrate it into our lives. Now, I didn't come up with SMART goals. It's been around for a long time. I don't know who created it. Some people, they use different words, but a real goal that is both practical and it has integrated the intangible spiritual things is going to be specific. Okay. I'll stick with the theme of no, I'll change off of fitness just in case somebody watching this doesn't really care about I shouldn't say care about it. It's important for everybody to invest in their physical fitness, but that might not be a challenge for them. Let's put it that way. But one of the things that I want to do is do the audiobook for my book. So specific. I want to complete my audiobook, right? It's very specific. I know I'm talking about the audiobook for The Art of a Genuine Apology. I want it to be measurable. Well, when it's complete, I will know, right? It will be complete. Attainable, right? This really captures how is it not just doable, because that's realistic. It's not just doable, but can I do this? Do I have what it takes, right? It's important to consider this. So I could say, you know what? I am going to go away to this place on this date and complete the audio recordings for my audiobook. So that captures the T. It's time bound, it's specific. I will have a date, I will have time, I have a weekend, and I know that it's very, very clear, right? So another example, and I'll go back to the working out, for example, because that what the example about the audiobook is a project time limited thing, whereas the goal around my physical fitness would be like, for this month, I am exercising and moving for at least 20 minutes every day of the week. right? As very specific. I will know when it's done. I have all that I need to do, it, right? And it's very realistic. It's just 20 minutes and it's time bound. It's every single day, right? So that's what I'm doing. And it's easy, right? A lot of the times we think, our goals are so big and they're so unattainable because we're just looking at them from a distance. But when we break it down into the smallest next step, then it actually looks a whole lot more attainable. And it's a whole lot more easy to take those next steps. So I've talked a lot. So now is my favorite part. I'm going to stop sharing, but just so you guys have it, if you want copies, PDF copies of the presentation today, just email me and at info@coachdrew.ca, and I can just send you access. I'll give you access to the PDF copy, but I imagine most of you are taking notes, but just in case there's something you missed, that's my email address. And let's talk about, let's have some questions. So the way that we've done this before is people raise their hands or they can unmute. So feel free to raise your hand and I will get around to you. Now, one of the questions that I've had asked before about goals is it okay to change your goals? Does that contribute to people not achieving them? Which I think is fair, which I have a lot of experience with. So there's a difference between quitting a goal and reprioritizing and then learning and modifying, right, your plan or your approach. Right. So I wouldn't say any of those things are bad, but if you know that your pattern is to quit goals, I think it's something to look into. Right. And to understand, again, failure is not our enemy, it's our friend. So what are these patterns teaching us? Right. Sometimes changing a goal is really acceptance. Okay, this season of my life does not allow for me to pursue that goal. So we can mourn it, we can grieve it, but our lives are not over. We still have purpose, we still have life. There are other things that we can invest in. So sometimes it's wise to leave something behind and move into a next season or focus, prioritize on a particular goal. Saying hello and yes to something sometimes means saying goodbye or no to other things. So it's not necessarily bad. But again, if it's repetitive, if it's a repeated pattern, there's usually some things that we want to look at and that we want to change. Okay. All right. Any questions?
Okay, my name is George, and I wanted to know, how do you know when your goals are unrealistic goals that eventually might make you either to stop it or to change it on your way?
Good question. So how do we know when a goal is unrealistic and whether or not it's a good time to stop and or change? So some goals are unrealistic in the sense that they're just not doable. And I'm not just talking about in terms of time frame. Like if I want to run full speed into a brick wall and go through it unharmed, I just don't think that's possible. But very few of our goals are like that. I think a lot of the goals that we see as unrealistic, they are the expectations might be unrealistic in terms of the timeline, right? We might not have considered all the factors like the sacrifices and what it will cost for us to achieve this goal. So it's important to consider those things, which is why writing them out and listing them and looking at them in the context of our lives, that's really, really important. There are many people in this life who started out with things that they weren't very skilled at, but they had a passion for it. And they were willing to invest the years and years and years that it took to develop the talent, to grow their talent and to become skillful, right? So if there's a specific example that you're wondering about, if you feel comfortable talking about that, by all means, you can share that. But I think that's part of the way to consider, is this realistic? Do I have the time to do this? Do I have the skill set to do this? Do I have the time to build the skill? Do I have the funding to develop to have the support to develop the skill? Those are things to help us consider whether or not they're realistic. And then again, the season of life. What goals do we have in competition? And is this going to be the priority? Will I feel good about prioritizing this? Because saying yes to everything is just not possible. Any follow-up on that, George? Because we have time.
No, I mean, you answered it very good. I really want to let you know that I enjoyed this session. It's fantastic. Unfortunately, I logged in a little late because I was in another meeting, and next time I will make sure that I log in on time. But another thing also that I wanted to ask you is, when you have a goal, or you create a goal, or desire a goal because you are watching somebody else doing well in something, how do you determine whether the motivation behind that is a good motivation, or it's just like, okay, well, that person is good at doing this, and then I see them succeeding in it. How do you determine whether it is the motivation behind you going to, pursue that goal will be a long-lasting one, or that one that will be short-lived?
Good question. So how do we determine and discern whether or not a goal is coming from a good place, or is it just because we've witnessed somebody else being successful or excellent in what they do? So I think it's very easy to move from being inspired to being jealous. And I'll speak about myself. Because I know me well, and I'm pretty healed. So our motivations, again, they come from these core needs. We have a need to be significant. We have a need to experience strength and be strong. We have a need to feel safe. So whenever we find ourselves moving from being inspired by other people to wanting to do and be like other people, that comparison is usually coming from a desire to be significant. Right? We want to feel significant. We want to know that we have a place. We want to leave our mark on the world. We want to know that we are strong enough to impact change in our lives. We want to know that we are strong enough to achieve things. God made us this way. So there's nothing wrong with that impetus. However, when we believe that our significance is going to come from doing these things, that's very different than being significant and doing those things because you already are significant. The motivation is, again, to prove, right? To be like, as opposed to simply be, right? So I think those are some indicators when we're comparing ourselves. That's not an indicator of a goal that is coming from a very healthy motivation. This is my perspective. This is my experience. In fact, when we find ourselves comparing, it's one of the ways to address that and to shift out of comparison, which will cultivate more jealousy and even coveting. You know, we want to actually celebrate the other person, give them their dues, like acknowledge how wonderful they are, and you know how God made them to be that way, and they're talented. Like, just separate the two, admire and appreciate. There's nothing wrong with that. But then when we turn our eyes to ourselves, it's important to value ourselves and appreciate what we have, right? And what we have to give, right? What our life experience is, to be grateful. And I mean, truly be grateful. So when it comes to many things, and I'll be vulnerable, I'll be transparent as a professional. Like, there are goals that I want to achieve. I want to impact thousands of people and millions of people. And I can look at other people and be like, oh my goodness, they've been at this for 20 years, or they, you know, are impacting thousands of people in their programs. Sure, it's something to aspire to. It's wonderful. But I'm overlooking the people that I do work with. You know, I'm overlooking the quality of now, in the moment, like the heart connection that I have with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or however many people I'm meeting with. Like, that matters. And when I reconnect with that, it's quality over quantity, right? That matters to me. And then I'm focused on my own life again, right? Then I'm inspired, and I'm ready to go, right? So that's one of the ways to shift, to identify, okay, is this motivation coming from a good place? Is it coming from a place of gratitude? Is it coming place from a desire? And in an upcoming workshop, I'm going to talk about purpose and the importance of purpose. But that's really connected to that. Like, I wasn't meant to be anybody else. I cannot do what other people can do. Well, even if it's possible for me to do similar things, I cannot authentically be me and do them exactly the same way somebody else would do it. I wasn't designed to be a copy or a carbon copy of anybody else. I was designed to be uniquely me. So we can use other people and celebrate other people and allow them to inspire us, but we perpetually want to invest in being the best versions of ourselves and not trying to be other people. Okay? I appreciate that question. It's a very, very good question. And like I said before, you can either rewatch the video when it gets put up by a day, or you're welcome to just connect with me for the PDF copy as well. All right, George.
Okay. So how can we watch this video again?
So I'm not sure exactly when it'll be up, but it will be on YouTube. Yes. So we're successfully recording this time around. So that would be good. Did you want to speak to that?
It should be up by tomorrow.
Excellent.
Okay. Is it possible to put on the chat group, you know, the
link
connection where to get the link? Yes.
Yes. We'll do that. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Dr. Blackwood, we actually have, I think it's a question, I'm not too sure, by Selena.
Okay.
In the chat. She said, I'm right to say this can be used from relationships with loved ones, I guess, as well as starting a business and even studying for an exam. Goals for any situations?
Yes, I appreciate that, Selena. I agree. Yeah, these are principles. I believe they apply to any kind of situation, whether you're having a relational goal, because we have relationship goals, right? Whether they are personal, individual goals, or they are, you know, practical or business goals. They ultimately, everything that we do, when it comes from a healthy place, it comes from within, and we have the opportunity to be aware of what motivates us and what moves us, and how we engage with other people. So, you know, when we adopt or we have an awareness that we have a lot to give, we're not coming from a place of lack. We're not coming of a place of need. We're actually coming from a place of purpose and fulfillment. And we have a lot to give. So we can give the best that we have to our goals in the short term, in the midterm, and the long term with other people as well. So I definitely agree with that statement. Are there any other questions?
Not in the chat, but I don't know if anybody has any.
Awesome, awesome. Because I have the experience and the pleasure of working with individuals, with couples, and even, you know, organizations and teams, I've noticed that there isn't much difference between working with a younger person and somebody who is more, you know, advanced in their years. You know, it's the same principles and they work the same. But what's interesting is you will find two things stand out for me. The clarity that that older people have is very different than the clarity that younger people have, right? Younger people usually, it's easy to help them identify what it is that they want. Maybe because they haven't had a lot of life experience, or they're closer to spending a lot of their time dreaming and daydreaming and imagining. Whereas I think the older we get is the more entrenched we get in life, and, you know, the responsibilities and the concerns, and that's usually what we are so focused on, that it's challenging to look beyond that. So it's helpful for people to have that alternative experience, or it's that outside perspective, to see a little bit beyond their typical barriers, because a lot of the things that prevent us in one area from achieving our goals are the same things that have prevented us in other areas. So that's one thing that I think is really interesting at looking across the ages. But the other thing, which is a hard pill for many of us to swallow, but when we look at ourselves and we look at the contributing factors that we are in control of, when we don't achieve a goal, when we can look at what we are responsible for and we say, okay, well, you know, I didn't do this, or I didn't do that, or I did this, and one of the topics we're going to talk about is self-sabotage. So I won't get into deep to it now, but when we look at how we function in those moments, there's a lot to be learned about ourselves. Oh, I typically do this. I tend to do this. I tend to do this. Oh, wow. That has very little to do with anybody else but me. And what's interesting is that when we identify that and we look at ourselves honestly, we realize, oh, I'm not actually living out my true self in that moment. I'm not behaving and functioning to my full capacity. And it's really interesting to help people see that and to see where that's coming from, right? It's always coming from somewhere. I shouldn't say always because it's so absolute. But in the context that I'm thinking of, when people realize, oh, I'm not performing to my actual optimal potential, it's not because it's not possible, and it's not usually because of somebody else, right? It's this internal experience that people become aware of, that they're like, oh, and when they realize it, they can make this shift. And I'll speak for myself. One of the things that I am now growing out of is counting myself out of an opportunity. For many, many years, and I just realized this, I would pass up opportunities for things because I would automatically tell myself why I couldn't do something, or why somebody wouldn't choose me for a particular role. You know, it became evident when I was supporting this Christmas production as a part of a church team. I was as an associate pastor, and I was responsible to, you know, find the talent and help write the script and all the stuff for a Christmas production. But it was going to be, you know, on national television and all this other stuff. And the way I engaged with the producer was as if I knew nothing. I engaged as if I had nothing to offer, and I was just waiting for information for him to tell me what to do or what would be good. And, you know, when I had all of these wonderful ideas, I had these years of experience, but upon reflection, I realized, oh, Andrew, you're engaging as if you are inferior, as if you have nothing to offer. And I could look back at my life and be like, oh, I've done that for a long time. Right. So really getting a sense of where that was coming from was helpful for me. So to the point where when I engage with this person again, because I had another opportunity to work with this person, it was completely different. It was night and day. I had access to all, I not only did I have an awareness of all of my experience and what I had to bring, but I actually valued what I had to bring. So being aware of, again, these patterned ways of being is actually really helpful to allow us to move forward. A lot of times we think barriers are other people. We think barriers are systems. We think barriers are, and they may be very real, very present. However, I think the biggest obstacle in most cases is ourselves. So the more we are aware of that and we learn to shift that dynamic, is the more we'll actually experience success in pursuing our goals. So if there aren't any more questions, I'm gonna hand this time back over to Ade.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood, and thanks to everyone who actually joined this section. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood. And our next workshop would be in February. So I would want everyone to please be on the lookout. We are going to send an email and also give you a call to remind you of the program of the workshop again, which will be anchored or held by Dr. Blackwood again. I would want you to look forward for it because it's going to be an amazing one again. Thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood. Thank you, everyone. Do have a wonderful evening and hope to see you next month. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye,
Thank you, Dr. Blackwood.
You're so welcome.
Really appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Have a good night.
Okay,
Have a good night.